There we go. I got a little clicker so I can like start the video. It's cool. Okay. All right, so let's pick up, reassort, figure out, piece together, put together where we are. Okay, so we finished the revolution. Got it. Yay, America wins. America. Cool. England. Goodbye. Got rid of them. France. Hello. We'll help them later, right? So now we're focusing just on the United States. We built a government called the Articles of Confederation, right? And we rock at it. No, we fail miserably at it. Why? And that's when you go, because national government had no power. You're correct, all right? Everything went to the power of the states. We created some issues because of that, whether it be taxation, whether it be currency, whether it be, the lack of a national military. Thanks, Shay, for all that. It could be all those pieces. The reality is this. By 1786, so 10 years after the Revolutionary War, after the Declaration of Independence, the United States is broke. They are broken. The states are conflicting with one another. And on top of that, America had had its pride absolutely dashed to pieces because, to be honest, the rest of the world viewed the United States as just a bunch of backwoods bumpkins that didn't even know what they were doing. So there's a pride issue also, right? The reality is this. By 1786, the United States is on the cusp of collapsing, and this nation, if you want to call it that at that point, is on the brink of ending in a span of 10 years. It's not a lot of time, right? So what changes? Here's what happens. So a group of individuals, we're going to call them delegates. Delegates are people who are being represented, who are representing states, all come together, 55 of them, all right? They come together inside Philadelphia for what's called a constitutional convention, all right? That is exactly what it sounds like. A convention is just like Comic-Con, Anime-Con, Naka-Con, DC-Con, whatever con it is. The reality is it's where a bunch of people get together and talk about the same common interest, right? Well, a constitutional convention would be a bunch of people gathering together to talk about, a constitution and a government. Makes sense. Yeah. So these folks get together inside, I got an itch. So they get together inside Philadelphia because for some reason we're still believing that Philadelphia is the national capital, which you and I are sitting back today going, how do they figure that out? Because 1, New York, 2, DC, but DC doesn't exist yet. I'm glad you figured that one out too. Thanks for teaching me that. So delegates get together and they start looking at each other going, guys, we're about to die. And everyone's in common agreement with that. They start realizing the Articles is a failure. It's not working. The nation's not working. Our pride has been destroyed. Like, we have to do something. If we don't do something, we're just going to completely collapse and fade into history, right? So people start bringing up new ideas. One of them is this idea of representation. So a lot of the delegates are agreeing the national government has to have more power, right? But how do we determine how much power the national government has? Well, some states are sitting back going, we have more people than everybody else. Hello, Virginia. Hello, New York. Because we have more people, we should have more influence on what the federal government does, all right? People in those states are sitting back going, yes, absolutely. There's more of us. There's more influence. There's more economic power behind us. Like, we have a reason to be heard, right? Yay. This is called the Virginia Plan. This is an idea of saying that representation in the federal government should be based on the population of a state. The more people you have in the state, the more people you have that have authority inside the federal government, all right? So in 2020, a good example would be like California. There's a lot of people. Like, it's bigger than a lot of countries, people-wise. So it would have, by default, more authority and more power inside the federal government, right? So that's the Virginia Plan, which some sit back and go, oh, okay, sounds solid. However, wait, time out, pause. Now you get the other side, though. You get folks from like Massachusetts and New Jersey and Delaware. And if you're sitting there going, where are those? Exactly. They're tiny, right? Like, they're the span of St. Joseph to Kansas City. Like, they're tiny little specks, but somehow they're still states, right? So those states are sitting back going, now time out, hold up. Now wait. If we agree that the national government is dictated solely off the population of the states, then that means poor old folks like us who don't have a lot of people in our states, we don't have any power. We have no say, we have no authority. So our voice doesn't matter. And that's a problem, right? So instead, they created this concept. Instead of it being the Virginia plan, they created an idea called the New Jersey plan. A good way to remember this is look at Virginia, it's big. Look at New Jersey, it's small, right? Two different plans. We already talked about Virginia. New Jersey's plan was all about equal representation. It was saying that regardless of the state, regardless of its size, everybody gets an equal say in what goes on. You get like one representative from every state to go in, right? So now we have two conflicting ideas. Virginia, New Jersey, two ideas on how the government should be maintained and how we should put more power to the federal government. And they do this, right? Because grumpy old white guys fight a lot, right? Yeah, welcome to the Constitutional Convention. This goes on for quite a while. In fact, it goes on for 3 months. 3 months of people bickering on how do we form a government. Which really, if you think about it, 3 months really isn't that long to, build a brand new government from scratch. Maybe they're onto something. What could I do in 3 months? I leveled up in my video game. That's kind of cool. So, by September of 1787, a lot of congressions and a lot of compromises have been made. And here's what they came up with. It's actually kind of brilliant. So they listened to each other through the smoke and the mirrors. They actually listened to one another and the complaints. And so they came up with this idea. They said, well, let's just do both. Let's offer both. In fact, let's take it a step further. Let's have one part of the government be all about that equal vote, that equal representation. And let's have another part of the government based on population, right? Some of you are sitting back going, this sounds really familiar and I can't figure out why. Yeah, you're onto something there, Skippy. In 2020, we look at these two ideas, the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan, and we go, New Jersey, equal representation for every state, no matter what their population, no matter their size. We call this the Senate today. The Virginia plan, everything's based on population. The more people you get, the higher the voices that you have in government, right? We call this the House of Representatives, right? So it's interesting that the two ideas, the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan, actually wind up becoming our two departments inside the modern day Congress. So we actually take both ideas and we keep them and we say, well, let's do both. What is interesting, if we go further into the idea of government and theory and all that kind of stuff, is the Senate actually has a little more power than the House of Representatives. So even though they've got more people, the Senate kind of sits back and goes, yeah, we've got the final say on a lot of stuff, like, voting to put in a new Supreme Court justice. That's something that the Senate has, the House doesn't. So that's really the big piece that they pull from that. So we end up getting a new government, and the new government kind of looks a little bit like this, to paraphrase. We're going to have an executive branch. We're going to have somebody that's in charge, but they're not really in charge, but they're going to look like they're in charge. We're going to call them, the president. So we have them. Cool. Now, we also have Congress. Congress, we've had before in the Articles, but they couldn't do anything. Now they get to do something. We're going to give them taxes. We're going to give them trade. We're going to give them war. We're going to give them power. But at the same time, we're going to make sure that there's an equal voice in it through the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan put together in the Senate and the House of Representatives to make up Congress, right? Later on, we're going to wind up getting the judicial system also. The crazy thing about this is even though we look at philosophers who were advocates of the three branches, hi Montesquieu, even though he didn't know it at the time, James Madison really was kind of the architect behind this plan of the three branches. Madison's belief was this. Eventually, and Madison was a dude in the time, he was there, Madison had this belief that, people suck, fact. We like power, fact. And we'll throw each other under the bus to get it, fact. So his belief was if we put three branches of government together, executive, legislative, judicial, president, Congress, and judges, if we put them all together and we make it to where they're all separate also, somebody could technically take over one branch with all the power, but the other two branches can keep them in check. We call this, one, separation of powers, go back to Montesquieu. Two, we also call this checks and balances. And we go in by saying, for everything that a president can do, Congress can keep them in check and say, you can do that, but we can top you. And for everything Congress can do, the Supreme Court can come in and say, for everything you can do, we can top you. And for everything those two can do, the president can come in every so often and be like, actually, I've got the final say. So they all keep each other in check so that one branch doesn't become too powerful, right? Kind of cool to come up with 55 people sitting in a room in Philadelphia in the 1700s. With that said, the other thing should be noted about this. the delegates themselves. So this is the road to the Constitution. We're constructing the Constitution, right? The other thing that we have to at least acknowledge is the 55 delegates and who they were, right? So these 55 people sitting back going, okay, here's how we're going to make the government. Virginia says they want more people. New Jersey says they want equal representation. What do you guys want to do, right? So they're all sitting back talking about this. We're like, oh, cool. Look what they did. Look at it. Here's the other thing you got to remember. The 55 delegates, to quote from one historian, the convention was hosted by a bunch of people who were well-bred, well-fed, and well-read, and the well-wed, okay? Meaning this, these individuals were from wealthy families. They had food on their plate every night, so they're living the high life. They were educated also, which was a rarity, so they could read, really. And they married into families of influence also. So that means the 55 delegates, like, even though they constructed this whole thing, which is really cool, understand they were not the equal representation of the United States populace. There were no women, there was no Native Americans, there were no African Americans involved. Like, no people of color were involved in any of this whatsoever, right? So we know that historically there was an impact, but it wasn't a voice for all people also, to which we still find ramifications of that today in 2020, absolutely. It is not appropriate as a historian or a social scientist to acknowledge saying, look at all the great things people did, without also acknowledging there's limitations to what they did and how they did it and who did it themselves, because of how our society had been structured at that time, and to an extent, how our society is still structured today. Okay, so quick recap. Here's how it works. Constitutional Convention kicks in 1787. The United States is on the brink of bankruptcy. Oh no, we're gonna die. Right. They start working out, saying we need to build a new government. 55 people do. 5, not 10. 55. Anyways, they start working together, saying we need to build a new government. They give more power to the national government. They want more representation in the national government from the states. They have the Virginia plan. They have the New Jersey plan. They compromise on those two. We wind up with the Senate. We wind up with the House of Representatives. We wind up with Congress. And then we wind up with 3 branches: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, okay? That is the down and dirty version of the road to Constitution, or the road to the framework of how our United States is built correctly after the Articles of Confederation. Got it? Yeah. And if you're kind of curious about it, like, draw it out. It makes a lot more sense, right? Got it.